So I got my LiveScop on my Vantage, and what I do when we're covering a lot of water, you know, out here we got big, expansive mid-lake flats and humps. And I'm just going at about 3 to 4 miles an hour. I got my Vantage down with my live, utilizing my side imaging, and anything that kind of looks a little fishy on my side imaging, I'll swing over my LiveScop, double check to see if they're fish or if they're rocks or whatever. But I'm just going, following this structure, and I'm looking out on the left. That's the deep water, so I'm looking out on the mud line there. And I can swing it over on the right side and look up on top of these flats. So I'm just kind of utilizing everything I have here to find fish in a hurry, especially when I'm going over all these big areas. I mean, some of these flats can go half a mile or more. So we're covering a lot of water quickly, and I'm just making sure to scan entire 270 degrees. And you know, if I come across some schools or some areas that have more fish than others, I'll lay my point down and I'll end up making a nice little milk run for pulling these spinners. So of course we're covering water, but I do also want to know where the majority of those fish are hanging out. And you know, being able to utilize LiveScop when you're pulling spinners is huge, because you know, fish move on structure. So yeah, I have those points as a baseline to go off of where I think I'm gonna track and follow them, but at the end of the day, if they're moving a lot, I can still use my live and zigzag, follow those schools and make sure to drag right over top of them. And it's not so much a guessing game pulling spinners anymore as it once was. I like to tie up my own snells. It pretty much varies lake to lake on, you know, the length and depth I'm pulling, kind of determines the length of my snell. Out here, we're fishing about 20 to 25 feet. There's not much on bottom as far as things that get snagged on, things like that. So your longer snell is actually going to run closer to your sinker as opposed to a shorter one. A shorter one actually will stay up a little bit higher. I prefer like a 3 foot. It's running pretty parallel, a little bit higher than my sinker. But I'm using a 15-pound fluorocarbon to tie my snells. Usually that 15-pound is a little bit stronger and you don't get as many hooks breaking off, but just tying up a simple snell knot, double hook. You can do a triple hook if you want, but double seems to be just fine for me. About 5 to 6 wraps on that shank. And head back through the eye. Left with a nice clean snell knot. And you know, I've ran spinners all my life. You know, we grew up out here with my dad running spinners, and it was always your big metal blades. The problem I have with that is now that you're utilizing LiveScop to kind of zigzag and follow these schools of fish, you got a lot of times where you're, you know, if you set your trolling motor at 1.1 or 1.2, which is my go-to usually, when you're zigzagging, that's not pulling your sinker, you're pulling your rig at that 1.2. So a lot of times, you know, your sinker falls down to bottom, and those metal blades would sink just as fast almost as that sinker. So you're finding your blades getting caught up on the bottom. A lot of these lakes have zebra mussels, so you're getting caught on the zebra mussels. So I looked for something that would stay floating a little bit longer or hang in the water column. It wasn't so heavy. So what I've gone to recently are these little prop blades by X Tackle. They're called spin beads. And these are a plastic blade. And what that helps you do is that helps you stay off bottom when you're slowing down, zigzagging, looking for fish or following fish. It stays up in the column, and even if you get slowed down to 0.3 or 0.5 in some cases, that spin bead will still spin. It's not like your traditional metal blade where you gotta be going, you know, 0.8 to 1 mile an hour for it to actually spin and look how it's supposed to. So these things will spin as long as they're in the water and you're moving forward, they'll be spinning. Really helps when you're going through cabbage or you're buzzing over rocks. You'll foul hook very seldom with those. That's my go-to rig there. Another thing I really like, so I'm full-time guide and I'm running a lot of spinners midsummer like this. And what I went to after the metal blades was the Smiley blade or the butterfly blade by Northland. They work great as long as you're not getting anything sticking to your swivel. If you get any sort of moss or any floating weeds that stick to your swivel, that Smiley blade will just spin and get wonky and you'll end up pulling up your line with a big bird's nest on the end of it. These being as inline as they are and spinning as freely as they do, never ever foul your rig up. No matter how much crud you get on that swivel, it pretty much always runs true. I'm starting out with a full crawler on here. A lot of times it gives you a little bit to play with. If the perch are bad, they can nip on that tail, and as long as you got a half of your crawler on there, you'll be in the money. So that spin bead coupled with a little bit of air in that crawler, things should never get stuck on bottom. Should always be hanging up in the water column regardless of the speed you're going. Guys, so we're out here on a flat calm day doing some pulling of spinners out on the humps here. Now we're in about the dog days of summer. It's mid-August here. So these deep fish tend to be willing to cooperate a little bit better than the shallow ones. We're able to make some long runs and cover a lot of water. Going about 1.5 miles an hour pulling spinners. Go. Good 17-incher. Yeah, he ate all of that one. So out here we're focusing on some mid-lake humps right now. And we're seeing a lot of fish, but they're 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards in between each school. And there might be 2, they might be 4 fish, but we got a couple hundred yards that have solid fish in the 1s and 2s. So instead of stopping and trying to sharpshoot one fish, we're kind of combing through the area. Bait's in the water the whole time, and we're just picking off the ones that are a little bit more aggressive. Judging from, we did some earlier stuff and fish just wanted to chase, and they'd chase right to the boat and not eat. Pulling spinners out here like this when you're running a couple hundred yards really gives the fish a chance to get behind it, chase it, and decide if they want to eat. But you're never stopping the boat, so they got unlimited time to make that decision. If they want to chase it 20, 30 yards before they eat it, they're more than welcome to do that. But we're just covering water and putting it in front of a lot of fish. And spinners has been the foolproof way to do that for a number of years. I mean, like I said, that's how I grew up fishing, and not as common anymore as LiveScop and technology progresses, but it still puts fish in the boat. Another victim to the spin bead. This fish was It's on a spot that we had just kind of pulled up on, and we cruised with live and side imaging for 400 or 500 yards, and I was able to, he's fired up. I was able to mark a few schools of fish that were sitting in that, 25 to 30 foot of water, and we burned by about 1.3 and pulled one of these fish fairly quickly. So on these big expansive flats and stuff, it definitely pays to cruise them in full before you start fishing, so you have an idea of where the majority of those fish are hanging out. A lot of these days are definitely not ideal for walleye fishing. As you can see, it's flat calm, it's 85 degrees, not a breath of wind out here. And spinners, for one thing, if you're pulling them fast enough, it's more of that reaction bite. So we're burning by a lot of fish out here that aren't eating, but having something with a little vibration, a little speed, a lot of times can turn your day from not catching anything to at least putting it in front of enough fish to get a few bites. So, we've ramped up our speed to about 1.3 out here, dragging a 2-ounce bouncer, where a lot of times if I'm going 0.8 to a mile an hour, I'll start with a 1 ounce, but upsize to a 2 ounce and put a little speed behind it, and that vibration and that speed burning by enough of these fish is getting us a few bites out here on a less than ideal walleye day for sure.